Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Talking Pictures. My name is Claire Fenello, and I'm the Executive Director of EFCOM. Now, normally, we'd be holding this particular series of events in the lovely screening room at the BFI, accompanied by a few glasses of wine, nibbles, and a lot of chat. However, we're delighted, despite the physical barriers, to still be able to bring you this wonderful event of film and conversation. Today, in support of International Women's Day, or as we refer to it, International Women's Month, Talking Pictures is all about women in film. Our panel is made up of a fantastic group of women. We have Ros Cranston, who's curator at the BFI, specialising in political and campaigning films, as well as women documentary filmmakers. Sarah Beesmore, who's founder and director of Zing Films. Sian Hamlett, founder and director at Hamlett Films. Jane Sayers is the Global Discipline Lead for Film and head of the in-house content engine at Shell, and Emily Clements, head of film at Radley Yeldar, and who will also be the facilitator of today's Talking Pictures. Any questions, please post them in the chat function, and I'll try to ensure that they get addressed before the end of the session. But do feel free to chat in the chat box amongst yourselves, because ordinarily, as I say, these would be quite chatty sessions, but we'd like for you to still to have that opportunity amongst yourselves. Before we crack on, I would just like to flag a few of the other events that we have coming up in support of International Women's Month. So next week we have Wednesday, 17th of March, Bridging the Support Gap in the meetings, events and accommodation industry. On Wednesday, the 24th of March, we have a perspective of the events industry from the next generation. We have on the 31st of March, Aspirational Women in the Corporate Film Industry, and another spectacular panel on there. And then finally, we are doing, it's a pre-record, but we'll be talking to some of the young female winners of the Focus Awards, which was our newly introduced award for young filmmakers last year. So we've got a lot going on over the next few weeks. At least one a week. So I do hope those of you who are here today will be able to join us for one of the other events. But for now, I'm just going to hand you over to Emily, who will be facilitating the rest of the afternoon's conversation. And I do hope you enjoy it, because I think it looks fascinating. So Emily, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, really looking forward to this afternoon's session. I guess we're going to try and keep it relatively informal, but we're going to be exploring everything to do with women in film. So whether that's films made by women, films, women making films, the whole gambit. And to kick us off, Ros has, we've probably gone about the first 20 minutes of the session where Ros is going to be taking a look back into the past and some films made by women in the past and the history of women in film. So I guess I'll hand over to Ros and perhaps let you introduce yourself a little bit further and some of the films that you're going to be playing this afternoon.
Yes, hi. Yes, I'm one of the curators of non-fiction film and television at the BFI National Archive. And as part of that, I have been very pleased to do research into non-fiction documentary, women documentary makers then and now. And it's particularly the then side that I'll be talking about this afternoon. I'm really pleased that we're actually digitally restoring the work of 10 pioneering documentary women filmmakers, and I'll be showing clips from 3 of their films this afternoon. The first clip I'm showing is made by a filmmaker called Marion Grierson, and if you know anything about the history of documentary film in Britain, you'll recognise that surname. And John Grierson is often heralded as the father of British documentary, but he didn't do it single-handedly. I mean, he was part of a group often known as the Documentary Boys, but they numbered a number of women as well, many of whom have sort of joined the ranks of invisible women in film history. And the film I'm showing a clip of now is called Beside the Seaside, and it was released in 1935. And that's ahead of the renowned film Night Mail, which is acclaimed for its use of poetry by W.H. Auden in creative music and cinematography, all of which features are shared by this film, which was released earlier and hardly anyone's heard of it. I'm just going to show you a brief clip, a couple of minutes long, and it begins with scenes in London. People are on a hot summer's day and people are longing to escape the stifling heat. So if we could see this clip now, as I say, it's about 2 minutes long. Thanks. Marion Grissom was one of two filmmaking sisters of John Grierson, and she made about 20 films in the 1930s. And then she married one of her co-film workers, a fellow film director. And after her first child, she stopped filmmaking, though she wished to continue, but she diverted her energies into editing a film journal. Then after her second child, she left the film industry completely, later on becoming a youth worker. But I'm sad to think of the films, that she might have made and never had the opportunity. But the next clip is from a filmmaker called Kay Mander. Now she proactively visited film studios to get a job in the film industry. She was very keen and started off in publicity and continuity, and then started work at the Shell Film Unit, which after working as assistant, she got her first opportunity as a director. And she went on to direct a few films there, and then she married another filmmaker who was also at that. That in itself, at Shell at that time, would have meant she had to leave, though in her case, she actually left herself ahead of that on account of having a blinding row, as she put it, and she resigned, though she wasn't rowing about her marital status. But she made a number of she covered a whole range of topics, but this film we're about to see a clip of was made by her husband, and she set up their own production company. And this was the first film it was commissioned to make. She directed it, and it's called Homes for the People. It was released just post-war, 1945, when obviously homes and housing were a very potent issue. And it's notable for the way in which working class women are able to give their voice at quite some length about the conditions they're living in and what they think of them, and they don't hold back. This is the longest clip. It's nearly 4 minutes. So if we could see that now, please. Now, Kay Mander made a number of really successful documentary films, even winning at least one BAFTA, or British Film Award, as it was called then, for her work as a director. And she aspired to work directing feature films. However, at this point, this is where she found that the battle was too great. She was told by Michael Balcon of Ealing Studios that a woman wouldn't be able to control a male film crew, even though she already had done so, and award-winningly so. And she just felt at this point that she decided to opt out, as she put it, of the battle. Again, her phrase. But she was so keen to work in feature films that she therefore decided to return to her work in continuity, which is where she'd started her filmmaking career. So very unusual film career trajectory, going back into continuity from directing. And she went on to work on some quite high-profile films. But the third filmmaker I'm going to talk about, she had a long career in documentary filmmaking, which was what she wanted to do. She stayed in her field throughout her career until retirement. Her name's Sarah Orolco, and she had an Indian Jewish background, though she said that caused some issues, but by far the greatest challenge was being a woman in terms of her career. She decided early on in life she wanted to work in documentary film. Again, she went to visit the head of Crown Film Unit, head of Shell Film Unit, got a job in the Shell Film Unit, and very quickly in her early 20s was directing films. Again, very successfully, won awards, and then she married one of her colleagues, who was also directing, but in a more junior capacity than she was. But she said it was a given that she would leave. And her boss told her, not joking, that now was the time for her to put out her husband's slippers. Unfortunately, her husband didn't agree, and he said, I married a film director and I want to remain married to a film director. And she went freelance and again had a very prolific and successful career, making films on a huge range of topics. And we're about to see, well, yeah, she spoke actually about her compulsion to make films, actually. And we're about to see if we can just show the clip from a film she made in the 60s called Something Nice to Eat, which was made, again, a sponsored film. It was about the delights of good food, preferably made using a gas cooker, as it was sponsored by the Gas Council. So if we could see that clip now, please. Thanks. Orolco and her husband had 2 children, and they both continued to work whilst bringing up those 2 children, though they did have an au pair. They agreed that at least one of them would be at home every evening for the kids, and this arrangement seemed to work well for them, though caused some disapproval amongst their friends and family. And interesting, later on, I was fortunate to be able to interview Sarah Orolco, and she did say that she felt her daughters thought she was a dreadful mother, which I feel she was being harsh on herself. I don't know whether there was some kind of guilt she was feeling, because I'm not sure that her daughters felt that. But she had this compulsion to work, as I mentioned. But I've been fascinated whilst looking at the work of these early women filmmakers, you know, how they have dealt with the challenges faced in their careers. And I'm intrigued to hear more about the challenges faced by the women on the panel that we're about to learn more about. So I hope you've enjoyed these clips, and I should say they will be made available in restored version, along with other early works by pioneering women documentary makers early next year. Anyway, thanks very much, and I hope you enjoyed the clips.
Thank you very much for that, Ros, and what a fascinating insight both into the careers of these women filmmakers, but also the lives of women in Britain, especially in that second film. I sort of found it fascinating and you know, sort of quite inspiring, really, to see how far we've come, even, you know, since quite relatively recent history, you know, to think about some of the challenges that those women faced. But you know, I think it's now the time to sort of start looking more at the present day and women who are working in film in the present day. So I guess if I could perhaps ask Sarah first to introduce yourself a little bit more about your career, and perhaps sort of talking about what the industry was like when you were starting out as a woman filmmaker.
Thanks very much, Emily. Yeah, thanks very much. I was, it was a funny thing, and I was thinking about, you know, what we might be talking about today. And, you know, I run my own company, Zing Films, but I've formerly been MD at Hawkshead, was part of Endemol, and been in various companies in London. In fact, the good fortune to work very closely with Emily in the past. And I was thinking about when I first started in the industry, and I remember starting a job, and I was told they had a very key client who really liked to have a dolly bird, so that would be my account. You know, I'd like to think that wouldn't happen now, but at the time, you know, it was very disempowering, and maybe kind of think, well, am I just there because, you know, I'm the female, or am I there because actually I can understand what you need to make a good program? And I think a lot of women, you know, producers have that kind of challenge, you know, constantly trying to prove themselves and try and prove that they are actually valid in the workplace. And I'd like to think that doesn't happen now. You know, it's quite a long time ago since I started, but you know, I think looking at those clips that Ros showed made me laugh at the in the home one. It was saying, you know, we like to try and find the utensils that make a woman's life better. So, well, the bastion of women. But I think, you know, things have changed quite a lot, and certainly, you know, when I was working with Emily and stuff, things were very different. And I would also say that I think this industry does have a lot of very strong female roles, particularly as producers. I think that's, you know, I don't know whether that's down to kind of communication. I'm not saying men can't communicate, but I think often you do find that women predominantly are in the role of producer. So yeah, you know, it's. I think this industry has a long way to go still, but I certainly think it's pushing more boundaries than some other industries.
Yeah, it's maybe unusual to have an industry where uniquely that kind of, bringing together role, sort of pulling the team together does fall more naturally to women than men, although we have more probably male directors than women on set. Which actually, I'll probably throw to Sian next, and you can introduce yourself a little bit. And I know one of the films that you're going to come on to talk about actually sort of set out to make sure you were using female crews and things to help tell that story. So perhaps if you could just introduce yourself and a little bit about your early experiences in the industry.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emily. My name's Sian, and I'm the managing director of Hamlett Films. We specialise in making education films for university broadcasts, so we're very much in education and learning. It's really interesting to reflect, actually. I'm thinking, for me personally, when I first started out, I saw lots of really inspirational producers, but I didn't see any women reflected in director roles, in creative roles. And whenever I went for jobs, it was always to push me down the producer route, I remember, and not down the director route. I was always asked if I could type. It was, I found it very difficult not having female role models. And I've had a lot of experiences of being on set, perhaps with older male crews, and kind of just not being listened to the way you would expect to. I think things are changing. I think things are moving on. But I have to say, I was meeting a client only a few years ago. Someone I'd never met before. I arrived. We sat down. There was a few people, and basically they were waiting for my boss to arrive, Mr. Hamlett. So, we're talking 5 years ago, and I'm not saying that person was very old. So, yes, I think there is change, there is movement, but I think there is a long way to go. Yeah,
for sure. There's still room to improve things. Which actually probably neatly brings us on to Jane, if perhaps you could introduce yourself and also set up the first of the films that we're going to be watching from the more present era.
Sure. So my career started back in the early 1990s at the BBC, where there were quite a few female directors, actually, reflecting back. I mean, most of the women were producers or in production management, but there were some female directors at that time. But I remember as a very young entrant to the BBC being interviewed by a very significant figure in the documentary industry at that time, and coming into his office for the first time. And there was a sofa there, and he said to me, "This is the casting couch. We don't have curtains here. We're exhibitionists." And this is a guy who's 30 years my senior. And it was quite an alarming moment, to be honest. It was said in jest, but when you looked around the BBC at that time, there was a lot of sexism going on. And it wasn't always negative towards women. Sometimes it was slightly absurd. Some women who were particularly beautiful with incredibly long legs and, perfectly formed would get promotions that were beyond their experience or capability, while others didn't get a look in. So it was quite a challenging period. Personally, I've got on okay. For 11 years, I was a freelance documentary director working on lovely programming for all the UK broadcasters and then internationally as well. So it's never held me back. But, there has been bosses and things at different indie companies that, bra strap rubbing Bob, for instance. Bob, I've changed his name, you'll be pleased to know. But, people who had a reputation for being too hands-on, etc. So, but let me introduce this next film. So this is a very contemporary film. In fact, it was only launched last week. It's called Shell Solo Travelers. It's about an Indian woman, Geeta Tandon, who is a stunt woman in the Indian film industry. The director, Arunima Sharma, she's quite young, and
is really making beautiful films. I'm sure you'll agree when you see it. Her work's been compared to Wes Anderson's in style. This one is actually it's a lubricant ad, but Shell wanted to do something firstly to promote lubricant, but also for International Women's Day. So Chris, if you don't mind playing this next one.
इंटरव्यू के लिए
मैडम का मेकअप चल रहा है.
स्टोरी तो ये है बॉस. एक्सक्यूज मी, इतना डेंजरस स्टंट आपको?
ये इससे बड़े बहुत डेंजर देखे हैं पहले.
पहले मतलब?
चाइल्ड मैरिज थी मेरी और लोग मिले खतरनाक, छोड़ दिया उसे. फिर बच्चों का पेट भरना था तो रोटियां बनाने लगी, दिन की 500.
हाँ?
अरे कैंटीन में. बहुत लंबी कहानी है मेरी, पर रेयर व्यू मिरर में देखूंगी तो आगे कैसे बढ़ूंगी.
So I think that film was sort of the idea for the film was inspired by an interesting insight in that women in India have terrible mobility issues. You know, there are a few women who drive and who can get around. So I just thought that was a really appropriate one to show.
Thank you. And personally, I love that. I just think it's a lovely, lovely example and a lovely film and a very inspiring story. The next film that we're coming up to watch, actually, to Sian's earlier point, this is a film that probably quite unusually in our industry still it was produced by a woman, but the key strategist on the film was a woman, and also the key creative on the film was a woman as well. And this is one that was made for International Women's Day, but a few years ago. So it was in 2018, and it was inspired by a statistic from the World Economic Forum that we wouldn't reach gender parity and for another 217 years. I'm really pleased to say that actually the report that's come out more recently said in 2020 that gap was down to 99.5 years, so nearly halved. But as we might come on to chat a bit later, it'll be interesting to see whether that gap increases a little bit given the year that we've all just lived through. So perhaps if you would just play this film and then we'll come back.
Our lives will drastically change in 200 years from now.
More women will go into space.
Like robots, like you see in movies.
Probably be able to walk into a phone booth and get a new heart or something.
I think everyone's going to have microchips in their heads.
Cars might fly.
I just think it's going to be surreal.
Hopefully, in the next 200 years.
It's definitely going to happen.
It should have happened by now.
Yes, of course. This is one of the most important points in which our century is concentrating on.
In the future, it won't even have to be mentioned.
Really?
Wow.
Really?
That surprises me, yeah.
Wow.
Well, who's going to be dragging their heels that long?
I don't think everybody wants to be equal. When you have the upper end, you don't want to lose it.
I think it's terribly sad that it's still an issue.
If girls didn't have the same choices, then it would be unfair.
We need to get more women into positions of power.
If you've got two people who are equally qualified, equally experienced, then they should be equally paid and equally treated. It's just common sense, really, isn't it?
So, I mean, it's really encouraging to see how much progress perhaps has been made even in the last sort of 2 or 3 years. But I wondered, Sian, what sort of positive inroads are you seeing perhaps in the industry?
I think for us, in terms of working with teams, with crews, I see a lot more women coming through in terms of sound, in terms of camera, and in terms of creative roles as well. Often now we do have entire productions end-to-end which are run by female teams. She's just happening to be some of the best people for the job. Sometimes that is pointed out to us as being a little different, or if it's a special type of project. But that's something really encouraging which I've seen change.
And do you find that if you're turning up for a shoot with a totally female crew, how do you find that is received, and also how do you find that sort of has an effect on the quality of the product that you're putting together?
I think it's very different in terms of perhaps communication skills and that way of working very closely together. I don't feel sometimes there's an element in the same way. I find there's very, very strong teamwork. Sometimes years ago I found that perhaps if we were on a corporate job that comments were made that we had a whole female team on set. You know, it was just the people we chose, the best people for the job. It was even suggested by a few DOPs that perhaps we needed to have a token male member of the crew on set. But, you know, I just think you work with the best people. It's great to have more women coming through, and you know, often you're just not really aware of it. It's just, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think it's great to see, you know, this year and in previous years as well, sort of how both our industry but also corporates are probably taking, you know, this gender parity more seriously. Jane, obviously Shell got a few mentions back in the early days of the archive. I suspect things have moved on quite a lot.
Yes, I mean, suffice to say, you don't have to leave now if you marry one of your colleagues. It may even be beneficial to marry a colleague, who knows. I think from my perspective, one of the most important things that's happened of late is the recognition that a balanced workforce is actually of benefit. You know, I think the fact that that's now a conversation is just enormously helpful. I mean, Shell, in Shell, I think it's quite a challenging thing. This is essentially a very technical company, and we have to wait for women to rise through STEM-related education before there are enough women to populate Shell in a balanced way. There are some areas that are balanced and some that are less so. But even in the short time that I've been at Shell, there's a big change. We're going through a reshape at the moment, and we see a lot more women being promoted higher up than is the case, you know, than has been the case over the last time. But yeah, for me, that recognition that it's of benefit is just of critical importance, and I think from there change will continue to come.
I think that's quite an interesting point, actually, Sian, because I think it is that balance that we need. It's not just saying we only want to have women, we only want to have women. It's that balance, because we all bring different things to the party that enhance the filmmaking process. And it's that kind of empathy that, you know, you might find is stronger in women, but it's definitely a balance. And that is where we should be kind of getting to, that it's just normal to have a mixture on any set and mixture as a crew. And what's interesting now, you know, even in you know, Hollywood films, they'll still say, oh, there's a woman director on this. You know, it's like, well, it should just be a director. Why are we always calling out? Why is it still, you know, so unusual to have a woman director here? It shouldn't be like that. It should just be a director.
Yeah, the director, exactly.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point, and actually, it was probably a good way for you to introduce the next film, Sarah, just in terms of that, you know, the benefit of having those sort of balanced crews, different skills together, and the impact that can make in terms of the films.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I think actually we're going to show somebody else's film first, weren't you? Was that, I think, right? But anyway, basically, I think the thing is on what the clip I wanted to show you is a program actually about customer service, but which is a kind of transactional, boring thing. But what I wanted to illustrate is that if you kind of get the right combination of crew and the right combination of people, you get people to open up and feel very warm, and that comes across on screen. And then you have a totally different experience for something that could be quite dull. It then becomes engaging, and you like the people. Essentially, you want them to like them if you're trying to make a brand program. So the program we made for a client was to try and get their staff to look at how customer service can be quite an emotional feeling, can make a difference to the way in which you would engage with your customers. So this is a program called Tiny Little Moments.
A really well-known French patisserie store had just opened in London, and I was really excited to try their biscuits.
I needed a new pair of boots. I went into the store and I just got so lucky. There was a guy, I remember his name, it was Matt, and he was honestly just an angel.
So I bought a small box to take home, and it was really disappointing because they were stale. So I wrote a really quick email, and later that afternoon a lady called me, and she was so lovely and really apologetic and empathetic.
He let me try on like at least 10 different styles, the vegan ones, the non-vegan ones. I ended up going with these ones.
The next day, a courier arrived with this huge box of biscuits and some luxury chocolates and stuff, which was just so overwhelming and lovely. And I don't know, I think the company really exceeded expectations.
So this was very much, you know, it was a combined effort, male and female working together to work with the contributors to make them feel relaxed. You know, you could see that we were all there as well. And that's kind of comes across, I think, on the screen. You know, they felt comfortable to be natural. They're real people. We haven't set them up, and they're telling us their real stories. And it's like just having a cup of tea and a chat.
And I think that's, you know, a large part of what a lot of us do is spend a lot of time working with people who aren't in front of the camera all the time. That's not their day job. And actually, you know, putting people at their ease and drawing those, you know, candid performances, honest and emotive performances out of people is a, you know, really important part of what we all do, isn't it?
They need to feel safe, don't they? Whatever the subject matter, the person they need to feel that they're in safe hands. And I think that's often, you know, our role really is to make people feel safe.
Yeah. We're sort of touching on the journey that sort of larger organisations have been on just before we watch that. And Jane, I know there's another film that you're going to introduce that sort of is sort of linked to that.
Absolutely. So this film is actually, it was an almost all-female crew. I'd love to say it was an all-female crew, but we could not find a female spark who was available at the time. And I'm not sure if the production team couldn't find a female spark at all. I must admit, I don't think I've ever met one. Maybe some of you have. But other than that, it was an all-female crew. This is directed by Elizabeth Stopford. This is phase 3 of a campaign about closing the gender gap. And I'll tell you a little bit about phase 1. In phase 1, we see a girl, and we're hearing comments that she hears throughout her education and her progression and through her career. And these are all real comments that women have received, not within Shell, comments from all different areas. but they're all real. And as in phase 1, we see the child who's filled with hope, and people are saying, you can be anything, you can be whatever you want. And once she gets to work and she gets older, she starts hearing more, oh, they gave you a promotion too, and assumptions that she should be providing tea for people and that sort of thing. And it's an interesting reflection, I think, on how difficult it can be for women to progress and remain supported throughout their careers. This is phase 3, as I mentioned, and on this occasion we subjected our CEO to some of those comments that women face and asked for his reflections on them.
Why doesn't your husband just let you stay home? Hey, sweetie, when you got a minute, I'll get a cup of coffee.
Look who's wearing earrings today.
You got promoted too? Hey, guys, no swearing. There's a woman in the room.
Are you sure you'll be able to handle this course? It's quite advanced.
We'll do the more technical stuff, and you can take notes, okay?
That's incredible.
Can you imagine what that would feel like?
No, I can't. Nobody should have to experience something like this. I know how valuable a gender-balanced workforce is. We need different perspectives to help our businesses innovate, adapt, and grow. We face challenges attracting and keeping women in the engineering and technology industries, and we need to take action. And of course, we need to end the biases that can erode confidence and cut short careers. Shell is working to close the gender gap by supporting initiatives to encourage girls to study science, technology, engineering and mathematics, by focusing on hiring and promoting women, and by setting a global minimum standard for paid maternity leave. Our industry needs the best people, which means creating an open and inclusive culture. Be the difference. Close the gender gap. Make the future.
Another kind of lovely film from you, Jane. Interesting, it leads what we were chatting about just before we came into that leads into a question that we've had in from someone who's watching, from Angela. So she's asking if the women on the panel think that they bring anything specific or different to their male counterparts to the output of what we create, and if so, what that might be. I wonder, Sian, do you want to give us your thoughts on that one?
I think following up from something that Sarah mentioned was that I think female teams can be very relaxed, very open, and they can encourage contributors to relax, open up, communicate. I think there's a different way of working with their contributors, with people on set. I just think often there's something different that they bring to set.
And Sarah, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think that we bring?
I agree. I think one of the things I would say is that we have a different way. Women have a different way of communicating with other people, and you tend to kind of get a little bit more under the skin. And I certainly find that people tend to tell me more about themselves, more personal. I think we have a different way of listening, and are much more likely to just know a bit more about the wider story of the people where they were talking to, and kind of I found that my role, whether I'm working with a female crew or male crew, is to kind of then be the interplay between the knowledge that I've then found and then communicating that to the director, and then bringing that kind of warmth and banter, almost like bringing them both together, and then I hand it over to him. So I definitely see it's my job is to it's a thing that actually comes naturally. It's not something that I'm trying to do in a manipulative way. I genuinely want to know about people. So I think that's the thing that just comes across. I want to know, and I ask questions, and you find out more, and then it comes across on the screen. So I think that's the difference. I think women have a different way of talking and communicating on a one-to-one level with people.
Yeah. And Jane, do you have anything to add to that?
I think from my perspective, because when I look back to when I was directing actively myself, and I shot as well, so I was invariably the single person filmmaker. For me, it was just that my best work was the work that was most personal, really, and where I had those strongest relationships. And for me, it was just always about the people. It was always about casting and always about really getting to know them and understanding them. And, you know, you're right, that brings so much more on screen. Of course, men can do that as well, but I think perhaps women do have the edge. I think we probably do have the edge. And you know, a thirst for people and a thirst for understanding people has always been what's seen me through, and I think what's come out in the documentary content that I made when I was directing.
And Ros, is that something that you've sort of seen in your tour of the archives? Is there a different quality that you think sort of female directors or female filmmakers bring to the output?
In some ways, yes. I mean, I think that certainly some of them would consciously make a point of really asking questions, you know, like in the Homes for the People, you know, Kay Manda would be sort of sitting under the camera prompting with questions and encouraging the participants to say what they thought, you know, to react. And I think that comes across in some of the films. There's this idea of is sort of female gaze in women's film, and I'm not always clear, and I know the filmmakers themselves have different ideas on it. Of the 3 clips that I showed, actually, Kay Manda, who made the housing film, she felt she was the one who actually felt she did the work. It didn't make a difference that she was a woman, even though obviously it affected her career being a woman. But she felt on a day-to-day basis, she was just taken for the quality of her work, which was. And I think she was unusual in having that perspective, and I think most women would say it did make a difference to their, you know, the way to their output.
Thank you, Sian. I know you're going to introduce our next film, and perhaps you can sort of reflect a little bit on whether the crew that you had around or the team that worked on this film, whether they had an impact in terms of the style, but also the quality of the film.
So this film was made during lockdown. It's a very small crew. It was directed by myself, cameraman, who I've worked with a lot. We both did sound. It's featuring an artist called Helen Hamlett. She was one of the joint Turner Prize winners in 2019. We approached the Open University because we were wondering what they were doing in light of Black Lives Matter. And this is a small film for their Race and Equality Hub on their website. So it's about bringing the work of female Black artists to the fore. Helen, I thought, was very interesting. And actually Sarah, it was about spending that time getting to know the artists. I think we spent hours on the telephone talking. So really, on the day, it just all unfolded. You know, we'd kind of had those discussions. She felt confident. So yeah, take a look.
I'm really interested in what I think of as histories. So I never think of it as singular. I never think of it as linear. It's something that's cyclical. It's something that's multiple. And the idea is if we don't understand the multiple in terms of histories, we will never get the complete picture. And we are in a situation then where narrative stories and experiences are erased. I made quite an early piece of work called The Singing Will Never Be Done, in which I read a section of the Rivers of Blood speech by Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell was a right-wing politician who made this speech in 1968, which is about the repatriation of anyone he believed was an immigrant in the UK at that time.
It is like watching a nation busily engaged in heaping up its own funeral pyre. So insane are we that we actually permit unmarried persons to immigrate for the purpose of founding a family with spouses and fiancés whom they have never seen.
Now, he famously made this speech at a moment where, in Wolverhampton, where there's a historical link to it. My father was teaching in Wolverhampton at the time, and he was on a board looking at race relations, as they called it at that time, in Wolverhampton. So it was a moment where I was, even as a very small child, I became more and more aware of politics. Now, my speaking of the Rivers of Blood speech as a black woman is not the same in terms of meaning as Enoch Powell, a white, right-wing, I would say fascist politician in the kind of late 60s. One of the things that I'm really interested in is this idea of the audible fingerprint and how we can say things, whether or not they're our words or other people's words, but our delivery of those words shifts and changes meaning based on who we are and what our experiences are. And in your family, you were a gentle joke. Uncle Tom, conformist, a white black man, little goody-goody. Negroes are savages, brutes, illiterates. But in my own case, I knew that these statements were false. When I first started to make work, I used myself and I used my family, and we were this conduit for kind of conversations about many things really, but about race and about kind of the politics of race in the UK. But what I realised was actually stories translate. So I made a film called Changing Room that is essentially, it's about a relationship, a conversation between, an imagined conversation between myself and my father. Because for me in that moment, you are not the boy aged 8 or the soldier aged 18 or the man with so much achieved. You're my father. And I made this film and I showed it in a group show in London. And a woman came up to me at the end and she said, you know what, Helen, I have to tell you that film was amazing. I feel really moved by it. I'm not black, I'm white. But what I took from that was about an imagined conversation with my father. Everything that you said was all about the things that my father had struggled with his whole life, this idea of barriers, not being able to do what he really wanted to do. And that moment I realised that I didn't have to start saying, oh yes, I make work about race, or I make work about this, because people will take what they want to take, what they need to take from work. They will relate and identify with what they want to and what they need to identify with.
Yeah, so just to add, this is Helen's work is very much about giving access to marginalised voices, be those black voices, be they women's voices. So it's about facilitating bringing those voices to the fore. And when her work is exhibited, she's an installation artist, it's about not giving people a set narrative or a way of thinking, but for people's own responses to unfold to that work.
Thank you very much for that. I guess maybe we could just touch on perhaps some of the challenges that people on the panel feel that perhaps they've had to overcome in their careers to get to where they are now. Sarah, I know you had quite an interesting sort of reasoning behind setting up Zing Films in the first place.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the things that has struck me is that this industry isn't terribly supportive of parenthood. It's incredibly difficult to juggle childcare and parenthood, and it's not really considered as being an option to kind of work part-time or to leave early. And I ended up leaving, not because I was pushed to, but I just found the whole juggling and running to stand still everything felt compromised. So I left the company and I set up on my own and was a single parent running a production company. So it's like out of the frying pan into the fire. But I don't think in the past, this industry has been terribly supportive of motherhood, and I still think the reality is it's the woman that takes on the responsibility. And even now in lockdown, we're juggling homeschooling, and you're on a client call and then your child walks past or whatever. So I don't think this industry is really very supportive of it, which I think possibly might be why you don't get as many women in the technical roles, because we all know that when you're on a shoot, you've got very long hours, and predominantly people work as freelance, so you're not getting that support. You employ freelancers for the knowledge they have there, not for the kind of career progression. So I think we're kind of almost backing people into a hole. And certainly, I felt quite disappointed that I couldn't have the kind of flexibility to continue in the role that I was doing without feeling that I was being compromised on both sides and compromising the people that I was working with. And I think that's a big challenge in this industry, and it's getting better. I know from Emily we've chatted about it, but I don't think it's quite there yet. No, and actually that feeling of feeling compromised, I think is something, especially over the last year, is those of us that have had children sort of crawling all over us whilst trying to do our jobs has been a real challenge. But it also reminds me, Sarah, I remember back when I was quite early on in my career and I was working with you, and we had a conversation about what I didn't know at that point was called imposter syndrome. And I think I described it as sort of just feeling like I was waiting to get found out. And I've long remembered that conversation and the realisation that kind of we both felt the same. We all have it. Yes, I think that's very much the case. Yeah, is that something, Sian, that maybe you felt, or is that removed from your experience?
Not that loads, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, especially at the beginning, and like you, Jane, I used to shoot myself, and I never felt quite comfortable or felt quite accepted maybe shooting as part of a bigger team. Often asked if I knew about fitting the lenses on the camera, which was quite interesting, or being able to drive a van that was too large. But no, like Sarah said, I just found it increasingly difficult as I was getting bigger jobs with my career when my son was small, and trying to juggle that as a freelance director and working on lots of corporate jobs as well. And the job finishes when it finishes. And if you can leave at 5:30, then you're very lucky. And it was just too stressful all around. It wasn't healthy. Can't say running your own company is easy, but it just felt something as a woman being in charge of which clients you had, how you made that work, how you made that run, and how you treated people, and what sort of company you wanted to create with what sort of atmosphere and opportunities for people. So,
yeah, and it's a very interesting point, and we were sort of reflecting earlier when we were talking about this session about, is it almost that you have to get to a certain level of sort of seniority within an organisation before you can build that flexibility back into your life? If you're sort of working for a larger organisation, sometimes it's easier when you've got a team of people, perhaps to be the one that grabs a laptop, runs out the door, gets home for the childminder, and then perhaps carries on later. But you're not sort of necessarily the one who has to be there until the very end or till the final. It's different for a director, obviously, but yeah, it was something we were reflecting on.
I think that's also, just to say that I think that's also kind of shifting. That in the past, I think we'd also be guilty ourselves of feeling that we can't leave because nobody else is leaving. So how can we leave? That's wrong. We're here. We're supposed to be in charge, and now we're wanting to leave. Just as you feel like you've got to kind of take one and share it with the team. And I think we are trying to shift that and say it's not that you're not working. You're just you've got other responsibilities. So I think we're trying to shift that narrative, and we do need to keep pushing. It's fair enough for us to have families.
Yeah. Jane, I don't know how you sort of find things in your organisation and what you've experienced.
I think for me, I actually put back motherhood. I put it off as long as I possibly could, until I got to the stage where I thought if I put it off any longer, it will actually be too late and it will never happen. And that was really because I didn't think for a moment that I would be able to return to a directing role. So I had to kind of wait until I was at peace with that before I had my kids. And that has pretty much proved to be true. After kids, you know, doing the directing and being on shoots as much as I was not, it was just never going to be feasible. So I became a series producer and did what I always never wanted to do and rose up through the ranks. I'd always been determined that I would direct and I would stick with that. But it wasn't practical. But I mean, you know, that said, I loved what I'm doing now. I love heading up a creative team and helping people to really, you know, make beautiful, beautiful content. So I'm certainly at peace with that decision now.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think for all of us, I think the time that's the biggest challenge is the time on set, isn't it? We, you know, when you're sort of prepping or you're in the edit, actually you can be a bit more flexible about what time you leave, but it's that on set pressure and you can't stop until you're done, and that's the thing that's a real conflict, I think, with being someone who's got to get home for a childminder or a nanny or whatever. Mindful that we're sort of running over time a little bit. We've got a couple more films to show potentially. But I guess should we move on to things that have made you proud in your career? I guess, Sian, have you got something that you feel particularly proud of or that you've overcome, do you think?
I'm particularly proud of a film we made for the Open University. It was about social murder, and it was we decided with our academic to approach justice for Grenfell, and it was a brave move. You know, I knew I actually had 30 seconds on the phone with the lady I was speaking to, whether she, you know, it was like she's going to say yes or no, and that was a really life-changing film. And we went in and we made that 5 months after the fire. And I think what makes me very proud is this film is on a criminology degree and it will be there for 7-8 years, and there will be thousands that will see it, and I hope it changes people's thinking and attitudes. So that's something I'm quite proud of recently. Sam?
Yes, sorry, Jane, I was just saying, have you got a moment you're particularly proud of?
Actually, it's not so much a film that I've made or anything. It's actually the kids I've made. I'm actually proud that I am managing to raise 2 reasonably well-balanced children and maintaining a career. You know, there are times when that is a real struggle, and there have definitely been parenting fails along the way. And homeschooling was absolute case in point. But I think, yeah, the fact that the family is working and the career is working is probably my proudest thing.
Yeah, I think homeschooling was a definite world of horror. And Sarah, is there anything, you know, that you feel particularly proud of?
Yeah, and I mean, I was reflecting on this before and was thinking that a couple of things I'd say I'm proud of. You know, I'm proud of the people that I worked with in the past, the people either work with me or work for me, and Emily being one of them. You know, and actually seeing that they've gone on to you know, take on big leadership roles themselves, and I think that's kind of quite pioneering. So I'm actually proud of that, and it's really nice to see. I almost feel like I've kind of taken a step back, and I'm, you know, keeping my world small because of my own situation, but it's lovely to see what other people are doing, and also sort of proud of the fact that you know, I did set up a production company, and I'm still here and I'm still going, and I enjoy it. And I think that's the thing that I think is very much endemic in this industry, is we all actually love making programs. We love what we do. And I think that comes across on screen, and I think that comes across in the way that we all like to collaborate. So I feel proud of being part of an industry where we aren't precious about collaborating and helping each other and supporting each other. We are all trying to make a living, but we share knowledge, and I think, you know, that goes for men and women. I think we are a very collaborative industry, and I think it's a really good industry. And I think if we can move forward and work together to change the way that women are perceived, that would make a huge difference, and it will be a force to be reckoned with.
For sure. I guess the final film that we're going to share this afternoon is one. I mean, I'm proud of the fact that it's my people in my team that made this film, but I think it also highlights the thing that I love about my job, which is this ability to shine spotlights on these amazing stories and these amazing people that perhaps we wouldn't ever have heard of if we didn't do what we do. And this is a film that kind of shines a spotlight on a female doctor and her battle against malaria, and definitely one we're proud of.
It is really important for me to be involved in a global health initiative because it's one of the things that helps the people that I see from day to day. I like to look at global health from the perspective of the developing world. And this generally takes me to malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, or even Ebola. In 2017, around about 450,000 people died of malaria globally. About 90% are in sub-Saharan Africa, and most of these are children below the age of 5. My daughter had malaria before she was 5 years of age, and it was a very scary experience. When you're the mom of the child who has malaria and you're sitting in the ward, you see the IVs go in, you see this tired, lethargic child, and for me, that just gave me impetus to work even harder. The malaria vaccine program has been over 30 years in the making and has had a lot of collaborations. Partnerships are very important for GSK. GSK is involved in a lot of the science, the discovery, but we then must provide our information to important stakeholders. In Kenya, the vast majority of malaria cases happen around Lake Victoria. It's a great source of livelihood to many people, but on the other hand, it's the home to mosquitoes. When I worked in research, I worked across the lake, and for me, it's a great joy to know that children in this area have the potential to benefit from this vaccine. As a doctor, I get up and do what I do every day because success in this global health initiative really translates into having vaccines out there that are having an impact on malaria, tuberculosis, or HIV. And that's really what I would like to see.
So just as, I suppose, a bit of a wrap up at the end of this session, obviously we've watched a lot, we've chatted about a lot. Is there anything in particular, and perhaps if we start with Sian, is there anything in particular that still frustrates you or you particularly want to see change, or are there any sort of resources or things that you would point sort of fellow female filmmakers towards? Very broad question there, but pick your one.
I'd still like to see more joined up support for women filmmakers who are coming out of university, you know, young aspiring filmmakers. I still see with young women who maybe opt to go other routes and follow through with directing. So I just think if there was more training schemes, more short courses, for women to be there on panels, talking, supporting, and I think mentoring. You know, I think we should be mentoring those women who are coming through, you know, and, you know, letting them see that there is a path through that, you know. I think there's lots more that we can all do.
Yeah, I agree. Jane, have you got any sort of final thoughts?
final frustration, I think, and that's for freelancers. You know, our industry is built on freelance talent, and I think it's incredibly difficult for women, if they choose to have children, to return. It's a double whammy, really. And I certainly, I do all I can to ensure I give freelancers the opportunity to come back if they leave the team and wish to come back after they've had their kids. And I would just encourage anyone in a position of power to do precisely that. You know, give them the opportunity to come back to their role whenever you can.
Definitely. And Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd back that with Jane saying actually you should support people to kind of come back to work, but also I think, you know, it is trying to get more female crew. I mean, you know, I don't think you don't get very many. So I think there are definitely kind of things that should be done in the industry to offer those options for people to kind of train in those roles, and for those roles to be possible post motherhood. And I think, you know, and I think, you know, Sean's right, we should be looking at mentoring and supporting and nurturing and trying to help kind of grow the industry. And I think there's also still a problem in certainly on the kind of, you know, the brand side, the corporate side, for people to kind of recognize it as a valid industry that brings in, you know, money. It's not man behind the desk and, you know, saying cheesy things. I think there's still a lot of work to be done for this industry to be recognized fully. And I think that would also change the balance.
Yeah, probably a topic for a whole nother panel on another day. I know there's an awful lot that we haven't managed to cover or talk about this afternoon, but I've really enjoyed spending the time with you all, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your films and your experiences. Claire.
Yes, thank you. Before we go, I found the whole conversation fascinating, and I just wanted to look up the name of a female director that I heard being interviewed a little while ago. I'm a big fan of the Simon Mayo, Mark Commode film review show. I listen to that avidly. And he was interviewing Mariella Heller, who directed A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And it was a fantastic interview because she's a female director who makes feature films, and her sets start at 9 a.m. and finish at 5:30 every day because she wants to get home to her children. And that is written into any film that she does. And I suspect she's the only female director in the world who's managed to achieve that. But the fact that she has, and she's very outspoken about it, is amazing. And she refused to get drawn into doing films through any of the lockdown periods where you created these secure bubbles and all the rest of it. And she said, because that's just not conducive to people's family lives and wouldn't be drawn into it. So everything got put on hold. I just think having women like that standing up and being counted when they finally do get in a position of power is remarkable. And I think just having, having people like yourself speak up is just brilliant. And it's the way forward. I think, as somebody said early on, it's having visible women and women that they can look at that have achieved the thing that the next generation want to achieve. It's having them in their line of sight. So I think that's wonderful, and I'm really glad we managed to get you all onto the programme, and seeing that journey from the films that Ros showed right through to films that were literally produced last week is fantastic. So I want to thank you all for your input. You've been absolutely brilliant in the run-up to this, and selecting the films and making sure that every single piece of film had a story behind it, and also sharing your own stories. I think that's been a fantastic experience, and I'm pretty sure all of our listeners will feel the same thing. So Ros, Sian, Jane, Sarah and Emily, thank you so very much, and I hope to see you all again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.